Hey there, Atari fans. I've got a special episode for you today. This is episode 30 of Wired Up Retro. I'm going to be going a little bit into the Atari Jaguar Pro Controller. And I do want to introduce a new item that's come out on the market made by Hoskinsons Industries, which is called the Procontroller. There's already a Pro Controller for the Atari Jaguar. But that controller was released way back over 20 years ago. It was around 1995. The Jaguar itself was released around late 93 on the West Coast and East Coast, and in 94 it was released in the entire United States and ultimately into other countries as well. And then in 1995, a year after that, this Jaguar CD was released, and at around the same time you could get yourself the Pro Controller. The Pro Controller has some extra features to it, obviously more buttons, and also maybe a little better directional pad, and I'll be talking a little bit about that here in a couple of minutes. So why don't we just get right to the reason we're having this episode today, and that is I want to unwrap my Hoskinsons Industries Pro Controller, and we'll show this to you. This controller just got released recently. Still have the, this is the first time I'm using it, so we're going to find out what kind of quality they made it, make sure it doesn't rattle too much, and hopefully it's going to work well. All right, got ourselves a nice long cord. I would say that's probably out to 6 feet. Looks like the material they made it out of is really, really similar to the actual Pro Controller. There are some differences here. The Atari logo on the actual Pro Controller is right up here, whereas on the Hoskinsons Industries Pro Controller there's no Atari logo, obviously for legal reasons. They also left it off the back of the controller. The Atari version obviously has Atari on its back. Okay. Also, on the plug-in for the Atari Pro Controller, just like on the regular Atari Jaguar controller, there's a little Atari word right there. Okay, this won't have that as well. I figure. It's lacking the Atari on the plug-in. All right, so yeah, let me. One thing I like, there's a couple things here. One thing I really like about the actual Atari-made Pro Controller is that directional pad. This has a very nice swivel about it. And, it's really not a whole lot different in its make compared to the original Jaguars, except it's a little bigger, okay? And that size difference can definitely make a difference when it comes to control. Also, the original Atari Jaguar controller, I've got Alien vs. Predator on the screen here. The D-pad has sort of a clickier feel to it. It's a little, you really feel like you're pressing buttons when you're hitting those directionals. Whereas on this Pro Controller, it just feels like a more normal D-pad type feel. Something like you would get with a Super NES. Okay, so it is nice. Also, these buttons, this one's a little more oblong shaped than the other two. It doesn't seem to bother me. Some people have noticed that, though. They're also a little more separated from each other, whereas on the Atari gamepad, they're a little closer to each other. So in a fighting game, this does have its advantages. Obviously, these X, Y, and Z buttons, X, Y, Z, are also an advantage for fighting games where you're going to want to use Street Fighter type controls. All right, so you got the pause and the option buttons still here. Mine on my old one is kind of getting faded. The white print is slightly faded, whereas this, looks totally awesome, brand new. And yeah, it does even have this pattern, this ridged pattern, and it looks like they were made from the same mold. The cord's coming out the back. We even have some nice rubber pads. So if you were to play a fighting game and lay this flat on a table, it actually grips very, very well. Now, so that's a nice feature. This also had it. So yeah, it's very similar. Let's see how the D-pad feels. in relation to the other one. Yeah, I would say that's still, it's got that nice roll feature. You can roll that around and it feels good on your thumb, and it's obviously the same mold, so it's bigger than the original Jaguar's D-pad. So that's a plus. Also, it's got the keypad with all the numbers. It's basically something you can put an overlay on in a game like Alien vs. Predator. You've got this button, number 7, taking you strafing left, and this button, number 9, strafes you right. Now, if you plug in the Procontroller, you're going to have basically 7, 8, and 9 represented by these top X, Y, and Z buttons, okay? So strafing left will be on this side, and strafing right will be here. You don't have to anymore go back down here while trying to manipulate and fire at the same time. It's a little easier to manipulate the controller. It would have been a little better, obviously, if these triggers up there, by the way, this is a really nice feature about the Procontroller. It would be nice if the triggers corresponded to 7 and 8 for this particular game, but they don't correspond to that. They correspond to numbers 4 and 6. All right, so yeah. Another thing I want to mention, let's think about this a little bit. These seem to be really clicky. I mean, it definitely gives you a lot of tactile feedback when you're hitting those shoulder buttons. The L and R buttons. I think someone has said in one of the forums that the original Procontroller, they were calling these shift buttons. Now this doesn't sound quite as clicky, the originals, but they definitely have a really tactile click to them, just less of a click sound. This one is louder, so I suppose that might be viewed as maybe a bit of a negative, but only barely. And they feel very similar. In fact, it might be a little bit more tactile than the original, but it's close. Okay, yeah, there's a little less of a clicky feel too. I can't imagine anyone getting so worked up about this that this is a deal breaker. I definitely would say it's not. In fact, I kind of like it. All right, another thing I want to show you here is the profile of the Procontrollers. As you can see here, they are definitely made from the same mold. And if you look at them this way, again, pretty much identical. They are, other than the Atari logo. The one on the right is definitely the new one. And another thing, when it comes to the original Jag controller in comparison to the Procontroller, if you take a look at how recessed up that center zone is on the new controller, it definitely is thinner, or you could say there's less bulky material in there. So when it comes to placing your hands on the controller, you actually have a little bit of something to grab there, and that makes it a little bit more comfortable, especially since you're going to be using index fingers. You kind of want a little extra grip right there. So I like how it's recessed up higher, and that's just like the original Procontroller. Another thing I want to mention is, I don't have this game, but Atari Karts is excellent with the Procontroller. It allows power sliding when you hit these little shoulder buttons, which is nice. I also tried World Tour Racing, kind of thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could change gears of the car up and down with the shoulder buttons. Unfortunately, there is no option in the menus, in the option menus, to enable that. You have to change gears if you're going to do manual transmission with up and down while steering. So you press up to change gears and then take your right turn, but oh, I got a downshift, so you're going to be doing that. So that's a little unfortunate about World Tour Racing. I wish it could be reprogrammed to allow for that. Maybe somebody will eventually do that. Another thing I'll mention here is that, you know, people have noticed that on the original Jaguar controller, there might be some harsh or sharp edges on the D-pad for playing a game where you're going to be in a fighting game. This sometimes, I wouldn't say it cuts into your finger, but you can, you know, develop a little bit of a soreness because of that. I'm not experienced that myself, but some have. And on the Procontroller, because it's got a slightly bigger directional pad, you may not encounter that as much because you can stay on this flat zone a little better and not encounter the edges as much because it's bigger. But the thing is, those are still some somewhat sharpened up edges, and the same exists on the new version. So is that a big deal to me? Absolutely not. Some people it is. Another thing I'll mention here is, according to Cyrano J at Atari Age, he had noticed that on his Hoskinsons Industries controller, Procontroller, that his D-pad was a little low in that area right there. I'll show you the picture he posted. The one on the left shows the low D-pad, and then the one on the right shows what it's supposed to be like, and a little higher up when looking at it this way. All right, so what he did was he opened it up. He determined that this, when it's installed, could be installed this way or turned around this way and installed that way. He found that just lifting it up and out and turning it the other way and then putting it back together solved the problem. So I don't think anyone has mentioned this yet. I did not, or I definitely don't have the faulty setup here. Apparently it's just an assembly issue at the plant, but yeah, you might want to check that when you get yours, and you may have to reassemble or disassemble, reassemble. Not a big deal, but just worth mentioning. I don't think I encountered that at all here with mine. All right, so yeah, you can take these overlays, and let's see how it fits in here. Let's see, yeah, that's a good, very good fit, I would say. All right, so yeah, what I'm going to do is just unplug my original Jag controller from the Atari Jaguar, and I'm going to plug in this new Hoskinsons Industries Pro controller, and we'll see how it works on Alien vs. Predator. By the way, there were about 250,000 Jaguars sold in the world during the time it was on the market. And then of the game that sold the most was Alien vs. Predator on the Jaguar, the game I've got in here. 85,000 according to one stat. So a lot of Jaguar owners went and grabbed Alien vs. Predator, including me, back in the year, I believe, 1994, or no, it's probably 95 when I got mine. I've got the Jag in 94 and then Alien vs. Predator in 95. I was so looking forward to it. And my first impression, by the way, this is kind of near the beginning of the game. Yeah, working. Forward, backwards. Yeah, my first impression of the game, I remember when I first played it, I thought to myself, wow, it's not that great of a frame rate. But I adapted quickly, and I ended up thinking, you know, it's not half bad. And then, of course, if you play as the Alien, the frame rate looks butter smooth because it runs faster. The whole game just runs faster as the Alien. So I was extra enjoying that. But really where the game is going to shine most is playing as the Colonel Marine. And we'll see if we can find ourselves an Alien out here. I'm going to strafe. Okay. It's in here. Is that door open? Looking for my first Alien. Oh, I remember being so scared when I first played this. I think we've got ourselves dead Marine. Oh, shotgun rounds collected. Some of the other levels of the ship that you go to have higher or a larger amount of colors. This is pretty drab looking right in here, but other parts of the game look less drab. Yeah, the controller's working great. I definitely am enjoying the controls. Shoot a little bit here. All right. Uh-oh. Now don't step in the acid. I'm going to have to strafe to get around that. Okay. First Alien down. All right, let's see here. Is that a door? Nope. And if you touch the acid, that's what happens. All right. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm just playing and playing. All right, so another thing I'll mention here, one of my first games that I got for the Jaguar was Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy. When this game was released, you know, people were awed by the graphics. It looks so much better than Super NES and Genesis. I would say, you know, very colorful game. It's definitely pretty basic. You know, on the left side of your screen, you've got the ship, you're shooting to the right, and you just want to blow up stuff. And you get to bosses, and sometimes the bosses look like photorealistic, like photos implanted on your screen that move around. There's not very good movement of the bosses. You know, it's like the frame rate is a little too low, but they do look photorealistic, and it also has another unique feature in that, you know, it's got weapons that you can upgrade, and each of these buttons on your Pro Controller are going to correspond to a different type of weapon. Like number 1 on the keypad corresponds to magnet. Number 2 is the tracer, and then you've got something called a beam on number 3, a flash on number 4, missile, ring, bolt is number 7, shield is number 8, cutter is number 9. So as you remember, the X, Y, and Z buttons correspond to 7, 8, and 9. So those particular weapons can be easy to access using this controller. You don't have to find your way, which one's 7, 8, or 9. So that's kind of nice. And also 4 and 6 correspond to these triggers. So that's a plus as well. One nice thing I like about that game, I kind of like the deep bass sound effect of the explosions. That game really has it going on in the sound department, which you know, a lot of Jag games maybe don't, but I like the sound in Trevor McFur quite a bit. Another game I'll show you here is Hover Strike, and Hover Strike has its keypad indicating that you can get to the radar and compass with buttons 4 and 6. And the external cameras are obtained by pressing your X, Y, and Z buttons. That's probably not a big deal. You're probably not going to use those very much. But the 4 and 6, you know, trading out for the compass or the radar can be kind of nice on the Pro Controller. This is probably the game you want to play most with the Pro Controller, because as a racing game, you do want to change gears with your nice clicky L and R shift buttons, and this lets you upshift and that's downshift. So Super Burnout definitely was kind of almost made for the Pro Controller to be used. I can't imagine trying to play Super Burnout going left and right and having to tap down here on 7 or 4 and 6 to change gears. There's your break. All right, another game I wanted to mention was Iron Soldier 2, which is, I have the CD version of that. And number 4 corresponds to selecting the right hip mount weapon, and 6 corresponds to the left hip mount weapon, and then 7 would select the right hand mount. And then number 9 selects the left hand mount. The only 2 that are left out, if you're playing Iron Soldier 2 using this, would be the 1 and the 3 button, which do the shoulder mount weapons, which, you know, it's kind of easy to get to 1 and 3, but yeah, 4, 6, and 7, 8, 9, you know, those are a little tougher to get to, and you don't have to worry about that with the Pro Controller. I also have this game Power Drive Rally, and there's no reason to play this with the Pro Controller other than the fact that you got that nice smooth D-pad action, which might make for just a better feel for a racing game. Plus it's larger than the original Jaguar controller D-pad, and that's a plus if you're playing a racing game. And let's see here, we've got Missile Command 3D. This will give you varying views using those shoulder buttons, which is kind of nice. I would say this game, Missile Command 3D, was pretty much designed with the Pro Controller in mind. This is one of the later release games, I believe, of 1995. It might have been 96, but Anyway, also Battlemorph has on numbers C, or I'm sorry, weapon base C is on number 4 of the gamepad, or the keypad, so that corresponds to this. And then 6 is weapon pad D, and then A and B are found again on numbers 1 and 3 of the keypad. So you can get to at least weapon bay C and weapon bay D a little bit easier using a Procontroller on Battlemorph. By the way, this is one of my favorite Atari Jaguar games. You have to have the Jaguar CD to play it. It is a whole lot of fun, and it's a little better than Cybermorph. I also kind of like Cybermorph. I enjoyed it when I first got it. I'm definitely an Atari Jaguar fan, I have to say. So hopefully this information is going to be helpful for you to decide whether or not to invest in the $120 to get 2 of these. I ended up splitting it with a buddy of mine who runs the Level 1 Games store and also has a YouTube channel, L1 Games. So, you know, that ended up $60, not $120, so $60 each. And that worked out very nicely for both of us. So if you are looking to get a couple of them, I'm definitely recommending the product. I would say it is a very much top-notch quality workmanship. You know, when you're actually pressing the buttons, it doesn't seem rattly at all. It seems like a good feel. Overall, very good. An option button, and let's see, pause works. I guess option's not used in this game, but yeah, paused. All right. So yeah, I'll show you a little bit more gameplay, and you know, I definitely like getting my Jaguar out from time to time. Obviously, my favorite game is Tempest 2000 on the system. In my opinion, it supersedes the PlayStation version of Tempest called Tempest X. It also supersedes the Saturn version. It just, there might be a little more slowdown with the Jaguar, but it just, I think it plays a little bit better, and I just like it better. It just has a different kind of atmosphere and feel compared to the PlayStation version of Tempest. I own a number of other Atari Jaguar games. You know, games like Zool 2 I've enjoyed. Theme Park is on it. There's a snowboarding game, Valdecir. It's kind of fun. And man, I've even bought some of the newer games that were converted from the Atari ST, and found out that some people were making those, so I grabbed a couple of them. One of which is Star Wars the arcade game for the actual Atari Jaguar. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so I think that's about all we got. Let's take a look at some games. All right, let's play a little Missile Command 3D with the Procontroller. This game has 3-button action, at least in the 3D mode it does. Got your Alpha, Omega, Delta bases. There they are. You look at your map below.